Yo, what is up, guys? Del Boy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully, you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So, something a little bit new in this video. A live recording, as you can see. So, apologies if I flumble a few times here and there. I am a couple of beers deep right now. So, apologies if I make any mistakes or any mishaps. It is what it is. But, essentially, this video is a career review. Maybe not a career review of Kell Brook, but me just taking you through his career timeline and providing a little more detail than BoxRec actually provides. I think I'll title this video The Curious Case of Kell Brook, the biggest waste of talent in British boxing. I certainly believe he's one of the biggest wastes of talent in British boxing, certainly in the last 20 years. I rate Kell Brook very highly, but to me, what he's done in his career doesn't necessarily match up to his talent levels, in my opinion. But let's get into it. Kell Brook, born in Sheffield on the 3rd of May 1986. He turned pro in 2004 against Peter Buckley, the 17th of September 2004. He was 18 years old at this time, and when he turned pro, there were a lot of big things expected of Kell Brook. At the time, he was one of the hottest prospects in British boxing, basically. Obviously, he turned pro out of the Ingle Gym in Sheffield, and a lot was expected from him. You know, the first few fights of Kell Brook's career were against the usual journeymen, you know, guys with losing records, guys who weren't really going to pose too many problems. Basically, just guys to go in there and get rounds against. And, you know, he fought guys like Ernie Smith, for example, 3 times, believe it or not. But 2007 was the first warning sign in regards to Kell Brook's career. He actually got dropped by David Kowalski in the first round of their fight, but that wasn't the warning sign for Kell Brook. Obviously, as we know, Kell Brook doesn't necessarily live a life outside the ring, and it's well publicised that Kell Brook got stabbed in 2014 in Tenerife. But that wasn't the first time he actually got stabbed. The first time he got stabbed was in 2007. And, you know, I would say that was the first red flag in regards to Kell Brook's career and his life outside the ring. As I said, Kell Brook's a guy who's always kind of been one of those guys who doesn't necessarily live the life outside the ring. And 2007 was the first glaring example of that. But yeah, he got stabbed in 2007 in Sheffield outside a nightclub, but he got past that and won the vacant British welterweight title against Barry Jones. That is not the same Barry Jones who works for BT, but he won the British welterweight title and he defended it a few times and actually won it outright against Michael Lomax. Michael Lomax at the time was a good domestic operator, and yeah, he cleaned up at domestic level at that time. Now, after the Michael Lomax fight, that was the time when people really started to kind of want to see Kell Brook step up. In March 2010, he fought Christoph Bienas. Now, this fight, BoxRec doesn't tell you this, but this fight was actually a WBO final eliminator. At this time, Manny Pacquiao held the WBO welterweight title, and this fight was a final eliminator. So once Kell Brook won this fight, he was really expected to move on and step up in competition, but as we know, that never happened for quite some time, and it resulted in a lot of British boxing fans becoming rather frustrated with Kell Brook's career. But anyway, after the Christoph Bienas fight, he fought Michael Jennings, once again defending his British welterweight title. He knocked out Michael Jennings in 5 rounds. Michael Jennings at the time was Kell Brook's best win. Believe it or not, that fight actually was on Sky Sports pay-per-view. He beat Michael Jennings by a 5th round stoppage, looked good doing it. Michael Jennings at the time was a good domestic operator. He actually fought Miguel Cotto a few fights before that for the WBO welterweight title, I believe, and lost that fight by stoppage. But he beat Michael Jennings, and he was attempting to move on, or, well, a lot of people expected him to move on and step up. And it was towards this time that Kell Brook's relationship with his then promoter Frank Warren really started to become a little bit rocky. His last fight with Frank Warren was against Philip Cote. Philip Cote not a real renowned fighter, not any good, and Kell Brook knocked out Philip Cote in 2 rounds. Now, at this time was when Kell Brook left Frank Warren, and there are 2 sides to this story. Frank Warren said that Kell Brook's dad or his stepdad was too hard to work with. Frank Warren tried to get him the big fights, and they weren't interested. That was Frank Warren's side of the story. Kell Brook's side of the story, or his dad's side of the story, was that Frank Warren promised certain fights, and they weren't delivered. You know, there was a fight with Mike Jones at the time, which was touted. Mike Jones back then was a welterweight prospect, highly ranked, and a lot of people felt that Kell Brook would fight Mike Jones in like an eliminator or something like that. Also at the time, apparently they was talking about fighting Miguel Cotto, Cornelius Bundridge at 154, but none of these fights transpired, and both guys left on unhappy terms basically. Frank Warren said it was due to Kell Brook's lack of ambition, and Team Brook said that it was down to Frank Warren not providing the fights. Make that what you will. But after Kell Brook left Frank Warren, he signed with Matchroom Boxing in April 2011. And Kell Brook's first fight with Matchroom was against the tough South African Lovemore Ndu. Kell Brook won this fight by a lopsided, unanimous decision. And in this sort of time period, sort of 2011, 2012, at this time, people were really starting to become impatient with Kell Brook's career. You know, at this time, there was talks about him fighting the likes of Devon Alexander, Timothy Bradley. None of these fights transpired. The fight with Devon Alexander was scheduled 3 times. Kell Brook pulled out twice with injuries, and Devon Alexander also pulled out with an injury as well. So that fight never happened, and as a result, Kell Brook was stuck fighting sort of fringe level guys who have been around a long time, and he wasn't really doing anything special, fighting the likes of Lovemore Ndu, as we've said, Rafael Jackwich, Luis Galaza, that was his US debut, and he fought Matthew Hatton as well in March 2012. By the way, in 2011, this actually marked the episode of Ringside, Sky Sports Ringside, which was a boxing show at the time. And basically, Sky Sports Ringside was a show where they covered boxing on a weekly basis. Just for you know, the news in boxing, they had boxers in the studio to speak their piece and things like that. It was like a regular boxing show. And in 2011, there was a Ringside special with Kell Brook and Amir Khan in the studio, and both of these guys were trashing each other, talking smack. And at that time, it looked like Kell Brook versus Amir Khan was a fight that was going to happen in the near future. But of course, as we know, that fight never happened. But 2011 was also the time when Kell Brook versus Amir Khan really started to get pushed up in the boxing media. That's when people really first wanted to see that fight happen, was 2011. But you know, it never happened. Kell Brook was fighting sort of subpar, fringe level guys. It was what it was. And Carson Jones. Now this fight here in 2012, July 2012, was Kell Brook's first major scare of his professional career. Carson Jones, again, you would describe him as a gatekeeper in the welterweight division at that time. Tough dude, fringe contender, I would say, but a guy you would expect Kell Brook to beat. That never really panned out as expected. The fight with Carson Jones, first and foremost, it was a really good fight. Essentially, Kell Brook, he dominated the first 6 or 7 rounds behind the jab. He was boxing really well and essentially just schooling Carson Jones. But after 6-7 rounds, Kell Brook's gas tank depleted and Carson Jones got on top of him and really gave Kell Brook hell, gave him rocky moments, bloodied his nose, and gave Kell Brook his first gut check of his career. But once again, this was another red flag that Kell Brook wasn't living the life outside the ring. He looked woefully ill-prepared for that fight, and it showed in his performance. Gassed out after 7 rounds, and it was a much harder fight than expected. You know, this fight here, against Carson Jones. This marked the point when Kell Brook finally got a nutritionist in his camp. So that goes to show, at this point, he was pro for 8 years, and it took him 8 years to get a nutritionist in his camp. So there we go. After Carson Jones, he fought Hector Saldivia, IBF title eliminator for welterweight. He knocked out Saldivia in 3 rounds, easy fight, was what it was. How Saldivia was that highly ranked at the time, I'll never know. But at this point, Kell Brook was the IBF mandatory for the welterweight title. And it was this time, sort of 2012, 2013, when Kell Brook versus Devin Alexander should have happened. But as I said earlier, Kell Brook, he pulled out of that fight twice due to injuries, and Devin Alexander pulled out once. That fight wasn't destined to be. So as a result, Kell Brook stayed active. He fought Carson Jones again, done a much better job in this fight. He actually stopped Carson Jones in 8 rounds, and basically he wrote that wrong of the year before in their first fight. And eventually, Kell Brook finally took some sort of step up, and he fought Vladislav Senchenko. At this time, Vladislav Senchenko was coming off a win over Ricky Hatton. Ricky Hatton made that return in 2012, I believe, and he fought Senchenko. Senchenko knocked out Ricky Hatton with a body shot. So at the time, Senchenko was actually quite well known to British boxing fans, and Kell Brook fought Senchenko. Obviously, also Senchenko was a former WBA welterweight champion as well. So this fight marked a step up for Kell Brook at the time. And Kell Brook got the win. He stopped Senchenko in the 4th round. I actually remember Kell Brook getting hurt in this fight. I forget whether it was round 2 or round 3, but he got slightly buzzed against Senchenko. But he got the win and looked pretty good doing it. People at this time were really keen to see Kell Brook fight for a title. After the Senchenko fight, he then takes on Alvaro Robles, who is a Mexican kind of journeyman, I would say, and he beat Robles by an 8th round stoppage. Was what it was. It was basically a stay busy fight. And finally, in August 2014, Kell Brook had his first major step up and his first world title fight. He travelled to America, to Carson, California, in the StubHub Center to fight Sean Porter. Sean Porter at this time was going on a bit of a tear. He basically mollywopped Devin Alexander, who Kell Brook was originally supposed to fight. After that, Sean Porter brutally knocked out Paulie Malignaggi. At this point, Sean Porter was looking like a wrecking ball, and going to America, a lot of people were picking Sean Porter to win that fight, including myself, I have to admit. I was picking Sean Porter to beat Kell Brook, but, Kell Brook went over there and got the job done. Wasn't a pretty performance, there was a lot of holding, but essentially, Kell Brook won a close fight against Sean Porter, landed the cleaner punches, he landed some really good jabs, straight right hands, and he got a close decision against Sean Porter. Now at this time, obviously, this win for Kell Brook would have gone down as one of the best away wins for a British fighter in quite some time. Of course, this was before Tyson Fury beat Vladimir Klitschko in Germany, and at that point, you could argue that Kell Brook's win over Sean Porter was the best win by a British fighter away from home, for the last sort of 15 years or so, until Vladimir lost to Tyson Fury. But, he beat Sean Porter, and we was expecting a massive step up at this time. This was when the Amir Khan fight was really desired by British boxing fans. This is when the Amir Khan fight was at its biggest. 2014, 2015, that's when people wanted to see the Amir Khan fight. Famously, of course, before this fight with Sean Porter, Amir Khan said, if Kell Brook beats Sean Porter, I will fight him. Never happened. We never got that massive fight in the UK. It's a shame because, Kell Brook was undefeated. Amir Khan was unbeaten at welterweight, looking quite good. And that fight would have been massive at the time in the UK. It would have sold crazy pay-per-view numbers, and it would have sold out a big stadium in the UK, maybe Old Trafford, something like that. It would have done big numbers, make no mistake about it. But that fight never happened, and basically as a result, Kell Brook was stuck in no man's land, couldn't really get any of the big fights. Did Eddie Hearn do enough for Kell Brook in this time period? Some would say no, but he was stuck fighting the likes of Jojo Dan, Frankie Gavin, and Kevin Bizier. In reality, none of these guys should be fighting for welterweight titles, but Kell Brook fought these guys back to back to back. And there was a lot of frustration at this time in regards to Kell Brook's career. Now, after the Kevin Bizier fight, he took a massive step up and fought Gennady Golovkin at middleweight, moving up 2 weight classes in what was basically a suicidal career move for Kell Brook. Now, originally, Gennady Golovkin was supposed to fight Chris Eubank Jr. in the UK on pay-per-view. That fight was in negotiations. The fight was really close to being signed, but Team Eubank did not sign the contract. They waited too long, and basically Kell Brook threw his name in the hat to get that fight, and they made the fight. Kell Brook took the Gennady Golovkin fight to his detriment, in my opinion. And also at this time, Kell Brook was in negotiations to fight Jesse Vargas. That fight at the time was a unification. Jesse Vargas was the WBO welterweight champion. Jesse Vargas just beat Saddam Ali for the vacant WBO title. And that was the fight to make in reality, but the fight couldn't be made due to financial reasons. At this time, Britain left the EU, and it basically resulted in some financial... It basically messed up the finances in regards to Brook versus Vargas. So that fight never happens, and as a result we got Kell Brook versus Gennady Golovkin. We all know what happened in that fight. Kell Brook, a brave and valiant effort, but he got beat up and stopped in that fight, broke his orbital bone, and that was a really bad loss for Kell Brook, given the punishment he sustains. After the Gennady Golovkin fight, he actually went back down to 147, so he went up to 160, full of muscle, and then he cut weight to 147 to fight Errol Spence Jr. At this time, Errol Spence Jr. was his mandatory. Fight took place in Bramall Lane in Sheffield. Really, really good fight. Once again, Kell Brook put up a good effort, put up a good fight. He was winning the fight after 6 rounds, but basically his gas tank just couldn't really keep up with Errol Spence. Errol Spence took over in the second half of that fight, and Errol Spence won that fight by a late stoppage. But it was a really, really good fight, from what I can recall. I've not seen that fight actually since the day it happened, but it was a really good fight. But Kell Brook come up short, and he lost his title to Errol Spence Jr. Just under a year later, he returned to the ring and actually campaigning at a new weight class. He moved up to 154 and he fought the former world title challenger Sergey Rabchenko. He won that fight by a second round knockout, looked really good doing it. And at this time you thought, could Kell Brook actually make another run at 154? But, then came the Michael Zarafa fight. That fight took place at a catch weight at 150, I believe. Kell Brook came in at 150. And, in that fight, Kell Brook didn't really look too hot. Zarafa gave him a few problems. Kell Brook clearly won the fight, but he looked a bit dodgy to me. Didn't look great. And at this time, people were really writing off Kell Brook. And obviously then, most recently, he fought Mark DeLuca at 154 once again. And he won that fight comfortably by a 7th round knockout. And here we are in November 2020. He moves back down to 147 after 3.5 years out of the weight class. And he's fighting Terence Crawford for the WBO welterweight title. I mean, listen, I'm definitely at risk of looking like a fool if Kell Brook beats Terence Crawford, because this video is going to be titled "A Curious Case of Kell Brook, the Biggest Waste of Talent in British Boxing." If Kell Brook beats Terence Crawford, I'm going to look like a fool. But regardless, as far as I'm concerned, Kell Brook, he really should have achieved a lot more in his career. I think the guy had a great skill set, beautiful jab, excellent feet, wonderful timing, solid power, just a really, really good technical boxer, great straight puncher. To me, Kell Brook had so many tools, he had so much ability, but he never really made the most of it. I think Kell Brook's biggest mistake was basically not moving to America after he beat Sean Porter. After he beat Sean Porter, I truly believe he should have moved to PBC and Al Heyman to try and get those big fights with the likes of Keith Thurman, etc. That's what I think he should have done at the time. But obviously hindsight is 2020. Here we are in 2020. He's fighting Terence Crawford. Eddie Hearn's got nothing to do with it. Dominic Ingle is no longer his trainer. A lot of people are saying this fight's a cash grab for Kell Brook. One last payday. Maybe that is true, and the signs point to that. I can't disagree. But all I'm hoping for is Kell Brook goes in there and puts up a really, really good effort, a good fight for the fans. Hopefully it's interesting. I want to see Kell Brook actually look good and give Terence Crawford problems. Nothing would please me more than Kell Brook winning this fight, just because I rate the guy so highly, and it winds me up that his career has just been mismanaged from day one by Frank Warren, by Eddie Hearn, by himself, by his dad. Every party here is to blame to some extent. Kell Brook for not living the life, getting fat, getting stabbed, hanging out with the wrong people. Blame goes to his promoters. This whole career of Kell Brook has been a bit of a mess, let's be honest about it. Of course, he's made good money. He's been a world champion, so it's not been a complete loss. But to me, Kell Brook should really have achieved a lot more, given the talent that he possesses. I really do believe that. And it could be last chance saloon against Terence Crawford this Saturday. Can Kell Brook pull off the impossible? A lot of people see Terence Crawford as the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world. A win here for Kell Brook would be one of the biggest wins by a British fighter away from home in a long, long time. It really would be. It would rank up there amongst the best. But he's up against it. 34 years old. Not fought at welterweight in 3.5 years, whatever it is. Those two bad defeats to Gennady Golovkin and Errol Spence Jr. Kell Brook really is up against it. But I wish him nothing but the best. I hope he goes in there, gives Terence Crawford a really hard fight, and I would love him to win. Nothing against Terence Crawford. I like Terence Crawford, but to me, listen, Kell Brook right now is going down as the biggest waste of talent in British boxing in the last 20 years. That's how I see it. But, yeah, man, I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts. Share your thoughts below. Drop a comment. What do you think of Kell Brook's career? Do you agree with me in regards to Kell Brook being a wasted talent? There are some people out there who believe that Kell Brook was always overrated and he was never that great anyway. And there are other people who believe he was a wasted talent, which is the camp I fall into. But, yeah, man, share your thoughts below. It's been your guy, Del Boy. Peace.